Hello and welcome to another lecture in the Saved in a Living Room Bible Worker Training Seminar series. Today we are going to discuss mentoring new converts. During the initial phases of your time reaching out to a friend in Bible study, you've been in a situation where that person has trusted you, in essence, with their eternal salvation. Now, after this friend, Ian, which stands for interested and in need, has come through to his own faith relationship with the Lord, you have been holding his eternal destiny in your hands, essentially controlling him in the study as you've opened the door step by step to truth. Now it's time for you to hand that control back to your friend, since he is at the point in his life now where he can go to the Lord for himself. Now it's time for you to step back a little, be his friend. But again, as we learned from Paul's time, a year and a half planting a church in Corinth, plus another year and a half feeding that new church, you definitely can still be used to influence your friend Ian in many ways. So there's some pieces of advice we have for you today that I hope the Lord can use to help you to be the best friend and mentor shepherding this new soul that you can be. First thing I want to discuss with you is the fact that, of course, we as Seventh-day Adventists are not immune to temptation. The devil's trying to sidetrack us on our journey home. The things that he uses with the rest of the world don't always work with us, so he's got other ways he's trying to get to us. And one of those ways is the little debates that happen within our ranks on side issues. People get distracted from the gospel and end up thinking about other things. And some of these issues do have a place with some simple Bible study and prayer. Usually a lot of these questions can be settled quite quickly and quite easily. But when they turn into raging debates, whether people are right or not, they're reasoning from their own parameters and their own opinions, therefore, ultimately, God's not in them. So no matter what the issue is, be it on the liberal side or on the conservative side, take no opinion one way or the other with your new friend. Let him, once he hears about these issues, work it out himself in prayer and Bible study. Certainly if you have an opinion, you can share to a small degree, but don't influence your friend from this point on something like, well, the current raging issue on the liberal side is, of course, women's ordination, and the current raging issue on the conservative side is whether or not we're supposed to keep the festival days. Neither one is correct. Neither one really has any Bible justification. And again, a simple Bible study could easily settle that issue. But again, now that your friend is a saint, having faith in Christ, let him or her make their own decisions, relying directly on the Holy Spirit and their own study of the Bible. Definitely you want to support your pastor. You want to support the leaders of your local church. And don't speak out against anything they're doing, especially if it's on an issue, again, like side issues politically in the church that we're talking about, issues of policy, issues of preference. Maybe you don't have the same preference, but it's not that big a deal to really discuss. What I'm really talking about here are moral issues versus personal growth issues. It's a moral issue. We've got a few more things to say on health in a couple of minutes, but it's a moral issue whether or not to eat pork. That's a sin to eat pork. But it's a personal growth issue. Once a person sees the truth on health, whether to eat clean meat or be vegetarian or be vegan, that's not something that it's your place to sway Ian on. Let him make that decision for himself. One way I like to illustrate the point, if you've ever done anything in the way of marksmanship, if you've ever shot a rifle or been to an archery range, maybe when you were a child at camp, something like that, you'll notice always the way they have their targets set up, there's always a grouping of circles, right? And you've got the center of the target, the bullseye. That's what you're trying to hit. But if you hit the bullseye once, and then your next shot is way off the target, and you've got a shot over here and a shot over there, well, you're not really doing as good a job in marksmanship as if you've got a good grouping of shots. Even if that shot's grouping is not quite on the middle of the target. What you want to do is seek for a good group and then try to get that group toward the middle of the target. So let's say there's a pastor in your church who's a pretty good pastor, but he's a little off base on some side issue and kind of gets on your nerves a little. Well, don't plant any seeds of doubt in Ian's heart regarding that issue and regarding that pastor, because the Lord can bring in another pastor in a few years if the church is slightly off track and bring them back toward the center of the target that way. You see what I mean? A few things to discuss here in the middle of your study situation. It may come up at one point or another, and if it hasn't come up yet, it definitely needs to do it once Ian is baptized and on fire for the Lord. That is, after you've shared a study with him on the Sabbath, and Ian's aware of the Sabbath and is coming to church with you, do everything you can to make Sabbath keeping as positive and happy an experience as you can. This is a great way, say you have a spouse who's not really as gifted in giving Bible studies as you are, but wants to help. That person can exercise some hospitality gifts. And you can have Ian over for lunch after Sabbath services and enjoy the afternoon, have some readings, watch a video, something nice and light, not too much in the way of pressure, but to make the whole overall experience spiritual and enjoyable. It's something you need to do. Once you've covered the tithe issue, and once Ian is willing to financially commit to the Lord, show him a tithe envelope. Show him how to fill out the tithe envelope. Explain how our system works with the various offerings. That from our study of the Bible, we don't see that tithe is supposed to be used to pay for buildings. So there's separate offerings for the conference to run the campground and for your local church to pay its light bill, on top of tithe, which pays the salaries of the preachers and the teachers in the area that you're in. So Ian has to understand that. As far as I know, we're the only denomination that regularly practices foot washing as part of communion. So go through, if you can, the foot washing service with Ian for the first time. I know myself, when I was first told about it, I wasn't comfortable. I took the communion upstairs, but I didn't follow anybody else downstairs first for foot washing. I just sat and waited. And I think there were 2 or 3 times I did that, and then finally I decided to give foot washing a try. Again, if this is something you can help guide your friend through, another way to bond him to the church, to bond him to you as a friend, and hopefully to increase the bond to Christ and make transitioning into being an Adventist from wherever Ian came from a little easier. If his interest grew out of health seminars, then Ian already knows quite a bit about what we believe in about health. But if Ian didn't come to health seminars first, then of course you need to have a health Bible study at some point, and you need to get him whatever information you can. And I will repeat what I said earlier. Encourage Ian to be open to vegetarianism and being vegan, but don't make it a test of faith. It's, once again, it's a sin to eat pork. It's not a sin to eat clean meat. And if that's where he's at, if he can't handle any more, and that's all he's interested in doing, don't make him feel bad in any way. You ultimately won't be able to guide your friend any further on the issue of health than you have gone yourself. So the best advice you can give is work for slow, permanent changes through study, through prayer, through God's leading. Don't get so caught up in health that it sidetracks your faith. Seventh-day Adventists who become fanatical about health, they can be very annoying people. I know this is the way I was for the first 2 years after I became an Adventist. I did get interested in health. I enjoyed it, but I went a little too far. Got to the point, about 2 years into my time with the Lord, that the central focus of my faith was no longer Jesus dying on the cross for my sins, making me innocent again, but whether or not to eat fruits and vegetables at the same meal, things like that. I wouldn't even have a piece of birthday cake on my birthday. Remember Oreo? Hello. When I go to health seminars put on by the church, I do see speakers who are very reasonable, well-balanced Christians. They're capable of being vegan because it's important enough to them to do it, but they show their Christian love by the acceptance they offer to others who don't. They're not there to make people feel bad. They're there to offer them something positive, and the people get what they want to get out of it. and then they accept them if they don't take everything the person has to offer. What I'm really talking about are the Adventists who are not health experts, who go out of those seminars and try to act like health experts and tell all their friends what to eat and not to eat, instead of telling them that Jesus died on the cross for them. If you find out in a study situation with your friend Ian that he or she is actually in a common law relationship and not properly married, that of course is a sin that will have to be repented of before he or she can be baptized and welcomed into the church. You have to feel out the situation, because if you notice this before you see the evidence of conviction and conversion, you need to, of course, let it slide off you, just like anything else, and wait until you see that evidence before you make a call for decision on the issue. But during the study time, possibly after, you may get drawn into Ian's marital problems. This would especially be the case, likely be the case, if the reason Ian is searching for God is that he or she is unfulfilled in the relationship. Now, you're likely not a professional counselor. You may think, well, I don't know how much help I can be. But remember, what does it say in the Bible? No temptation overcomes us except as is common to man, right? So this person's problems are not as unique as this person may think. So there are some things you can do. Definitely include a Bible study on marriage, on the value of marriage, and also on the roles that the husband and wife are supposed to play. Well, one of the first things you can do is, of course, take your friend to the Sermon on the Mount. Tell your friend that in the middle of the most heated arguments in the relationship, turn the other cheek and love your enemies. Applies right then and there, doesn't it? Your spouse is not your friend at that point when you're in the middle of an argument, right? So remember Jesus' words. Tell your friend about God's authority in the marriage. How Ian, when he got married, made a vow to God and not to the person he was marrying. And, as well, that vow was not a conditional vow based on the response he got back from the other person, but a vow to give. That's very important to remember. That's something they're probably not remembering at this point in the relationship. Welcome back to part 2 of Mentoring New Converts. I'm Les Miller. We were in the middle of a discussion on the roles in marriage in case in a Bible study situation or afterwards mentoring a new friend in the church. You are drawn into a person's marriage problems, though the marriage difficulties may take up a large part of a study situation for a short time. You definitely want to try to steer away from it as soon as you can. I'll give you a piece of advice from a pastor's wife, a friend of my wife's. He was her pastor when she was a child, and she kept up their friendship. And she had a piece of advice for me one time. She said, warn them, this is talking about new people here, warn them not to church themselves out. You know, when you're in the world, you've got all kinds of ways in which you do things. You've got activities you'd like to do. Suddenly you come to the faith, and then you drop a lot of those activities. You start replacing them with church activities. And, of course, this is good in many ways. But one thing I think people need to understand is when they come to Christ, they are changed on moral issues, but a lot of their basic personality issues don't change. If you were an introverted person before you became a Christian, you're likely not going to want to teach Sabbath school. You're likely not going to want to lead out in evangelistic crusades. If you were previously an extroverted person before you came to Christ, you likely will want to be up front a little more. You'll feel called to be up front. And likely this is what you'll be doing, is teaching Sabbath school, maybe giving a sermon once in a while, leading out and helping people with Bible studies or outreach, knocking on doors, things like that. But if your friend does too much too soon, then likely, as Marlene Littman said, they might church themselves out. And if they burn themselves out and church becomes a bad experience, then that will be a big challenge for them, a big stumbling block. So try your best to help your friend through that experience. Now, after Ian gets baptized, one of the best things you can do to expand your outreach efforts is to ask him to help you find new people. He's going to be on fire for the Lord. He's going to be witnessing, as I mentioned in the Psychology of Giving Bible Studies Part 2, the effect that this new person has, who's on fire for the Lord, will ripple through hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, that the church as yet has not had a chance to contact. And so take advantage of that. Is there a way you can set up another Bible study, this time a group Bible study, where Ian brings some of his friends to you and you study together? Now you're the leader of the Bible study, but you've got Ian with you as an apprentice Bible study giver who is now being trained in how to give Bible studies. This is one of the best things you can do to mentor your new friend. Take all the advice you have been given from the lectures on the psychology of giving Bible studies. That all applies to a group study situation. But I have a few more pieces of advice here for you, specifically for group study situations. There's going to be two people that you're going to need to focus on the most. One will be the person who understands and is comprehending and following along with the plan the quickest, understands and comprehends the most of what you're talking about. I'll call that person Ian M. Now, the other person you need to focus on at the same time and keep in balance is the person who's understanding the least and following along at the slowest pace. Ian L, I'll call him. It may be a tricky thing to do, but you've got to try to balance the pace of the group study situation to meet the needs of both Ian M and Ian L. Remember Jacob, when he left Laban to go back to Esau and return to his homeland, he went only as fast as his youngest child could follow, only as fast as the littlest lamb in the group could follow. So you have to take that into account. Ian L may drop off, simply not because he's lost interest, but simply as we learned from Daniel 8:27, he just can't handle it yet. If so, try to keep in contact with Ian L and try to schedule an individual study later on at another time when Ian L is ready. As the group study transitions to a point where a call for decision is going to be made, it's Ian M who will be the best candidate to make the call for decision first. When Ian M does make the choice to get baptized, his influence over the group and the influence of that decision will greatly influence them to make the same choice as well. Carol Torres, Louis Torres' wife, commented on the fact that with 120 people filled with the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, only Peter rose up to speak. And she said people bond with the speaker. So you need to preserve that bond by having only one speaker. So this applies to a small group situation as well. You definitely want to have with you some people who are already established in the faith, who are born again, on fire for the Lord, committed Adventists, to help you. But you need to have one person as the main leader for the group. The other people can be used. They can build bonds of friendship. They can be used in supporting roles like that. But you need one leader for the group. Remember the previous advice we had in the psychology lectures on socializing, keeping socializing to a minimum at the start of the study. Obviously that's going to be a greater challenge. In a group situation, you do want to have a good amount of socializing. You do want to build bonds of friendship that will keep people coming back to the group. But the truth has to be the most important part of the study. As soon as the closing prayer is said, try to get the people out the door as fast as possible without looking like you're policing the study, to try to keep the spiritual part as the last thought in their minds. The spiritual part is the most important part of the study. Now, I want to let you know as well a secret body language code that I learned from a successful evangelist. You may have a problem sometimes if your supporting friends get too chatty and end up distracting the study from its main point. Because he would always go and visit with a pastor, a local pastor, and himself. And when the interest was there, sitting across from them, they would start socializing at the start of the visitation session, and the pastor was free to say whatever he wanted. But as soon as, and these were his words, he said, as soon as I lean forward and start discussing only the baptismal vows, I'm pulling to get that decision. At this point, anything you say will distract from the situation. So what I need you to do is be the silent prayer partner. If you have a helper that's too chatty, that's distracting the study, what you can do is work out something like that to let the person know that the study's getting off track and that you need to bring the study back to the central theme. Work out some sort of signal you can give to that person that the new interests in the study don't know about, and they can just quietly, silently help you transition the study back to its main theme. Once Ian does take a stand, he's a newborn babe in the faith. He's inexperienced, yes, but he has made that decision. Again, we talked in the first mentoring lecture and as well in the psychology lectures about how you're in essence controlling the person in the study. You're holding that person's eternal destiny in your hands temporarily while he's searching for God. And essentially what you're doing now is giving it back to him. So you want to make sure in all this time of mentoring a new convert that you do absolutely nothing to in any way make Ian feel like he's some sort of junior church member who still needs to come to you to be told what to do. And this is especially the case if you've met a new friend not through a home Bible study over the course of a year and a half, but say the person came in through a 30-day evangelistic series and is now on fire for God as a new Adventist and has made friends with you and bonded with you, so you felt called to take on the responsibility of mentoring. The most important thing you can do is offer friendship at this point. Let the pastor's Bible study class take care of going over the basics with him, going over his doctrinal education. And he's had enough from now. He'll church himself out if he keeps up that pace of the evangelistic meetings for longer than that month. And so what you want to do is help him transition back into his life going back to normal, but his new life as an Adventist, and focus mainly on being his friend. The Lord has a format for accomplishing growth in all of us. And this is the format. You first have an initial enlightening, and then there's a dark period or wilderness time to test the faith of the person who's initially been enlightened. And that person has to get through that wilderness, last through that dark time, and get to a point what I call the second refreshing. If the person is willing to wait for it, God will come back again in that special way, just like that first enlightening. What Ian has gone through, whatever kind of faith experience he had previously, was an initial enlightening. And as you've been cultivating through Bible study, or as he's learned all the truths of the Advent faith in a series of meetings, that has been summed up as a second refreshing to his first enlightening. But now it's also a new first enlightening, because now he's an Adventist. He knows things that he didn't know previously, and he's on a new walk with the Lord. He'll be led into a new wilderness experience through a new dark time, awaiting a new second refreshing, which is of course the same second refreshing we're all waiting for, which is the latter rain and the privilege of seeing Jesus face to face when he comes in the clouds to claim us all. So, what you need to do in those dark times to come, as your friendship continues, when he's down, and if you happen to see he's down, and you want to offer him help, or he comes to you and says, I need help with my faith, take him to Jude 24 and Hebrews 12:2. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now unto him who is able to keep you from falling, and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. These Bible verses comment on the truth about righteousness by faith, which is the only thing that can get you through that dark time, and the only thing that will get Ian through that dark time. Essentially, what the dark time is a crisis of faith that every Adventist has to go through. And that crisis of faith is the realization that the message we are called to live up to is a higher message than we are capable of living up to in our own strength. And we can only do it in the strength that Christ is offering. We've seen the illustration of the process of evangelism as sowing, cultivating, and reaping, right? The sowing is looking for people to give Bible studies with. The cultivating is giving people Bible studies, or handing out videos or books, pamphlets, anytime anybody wants something from you in the way of spiritual truth. and you give it to them, you're cultivating. And the reaping, of course, getting that decision. And then we have also conserving the gains, putting things in the barn, which is what we're talking about now, mentoring new converts, helping people stay in the faith. Don't overextend yourself with any one part of the process. In other words, say you've gone out knocking on doors for 6 whole months, and you finally found somebody who wants to study the Bible with you. Stop knocking on doors. Study the Bible with that person. Once you start to see some results from your sowing efforts, cultivate those results and don't worry about sowing anymore. It's better to win one person completely than to partially win 100. Cultivate what you've got, do everything you can to reap it, get it in the barn. And our final piece of advice in these 2 lectures on mentoring new converts is, remember, don't let a continual outreach effort burn you out. Don't let it cause your faith to suffer. Remember, you have to go back to Jesus for yourself. Mark 6, 7-12 had the Lord sending out the disciples on their first missionary journey. They were full of stories. When they came back, they had successes and they had failures. And what did Jesus say to them in Mark 6, 31 and 32? Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. And that's exactly what they did. With the Lord working in us, doing everything we can to help and share the Advent message, it will spread to all the world, and soon the work will be done. May the Lord encourage you, and may these lectures in the Saved in a Living Room Bible Study series encourage you as well.